In addition to scientific and symbolic aspects of color study, there is color response, which involves psychological and biological action of color on human beings. First thing to understand is the concept of synesthesia. Synesthesia comes from a Greek word which means concurrently or flowing together. And basically, all our senses work together to respond to external stimuli. So when we see a color, when we see something on our visual field, we're not just responding visually. There is sound, there is touch, there is recollection of other things going on or things in our past, things that we make associations with. We will understand red as being a hot color because that's a synesthetic response. And synesthesia is something that all human beings have. Some people, it is a disorder because it is so extreme, and so people will see certain colors when they deal with certain numbers or when they deal with pain or certain external stimuli that cause some sort of reaction. There are about 7 different factors in human color response. There are factors that are associative, things that we associate color with, and things that are affective, things that affect how human beings operate. So the first we'll look at is inherited. Inherited response is psychobiological. Certain colors will act on the pituitary gland in a certain way, and this is common throughout all humanity at all time in all cultures. A learned response is something in our past. We have events, we have people, we have situations that cause us to gain a like for a color or a dislike for a color. And that's basically via association. So learned is an associative response. Geographic deals with the natural environment. People from the Northwest, if they like being in Washington State or British Columbia, they might have a greater affinity for the natural colors of the landscape up there versus somebody who is from the American Southwest, who might have a greater affinity for colors of the desert and the high plains. So geographic deals with the natural environment. We either like or dislike based on our preferences for those environments. Regional is different than geographic. Regional deals with culture. It's the difference between New York City and Los Angeles. There's different attitudes in New York City. You dress differently. You deal with color differently. And that's a cultural thing. In Los Angeles, there's a very different idea about color than there is in New York City. And if we go north from LA up to San Francisco, the architectural colors on the Victorian houses in San Francisco are very dominant within that city. And you won't see that down here so much because of the amount of sunlight we have. Our architecture is much more neutral. So a climatological response or a climate response is the idea that color compensates for temperature. It also compensates for lack of light. And this is why in very northern climates or very southern where there's a lot of cold during the year, the interior colors in homes and often businesses will be more vivid because human beings need light and we need color. Income is a factor in human color response. We use color to denote status and income levels. And we see this a lot with automobiles. Higher end automobiles will be darker red, darker blue, silver, gray, black, sometimes brown, whereas a lower end vehicle, say a VW Beetle, is perfectly comfortable looking like a green bug. You won't find that color in an upper end car unless you get a custom color. And maturity is another response. Our response to color will change as we gain life experience, the more educated we are, and as we grow older just in terms of physical age. So if you have a favorite color, it is highly likely that it's not the same favorite color that you had when you were 3 years old. When dealing with human color response, there's response on an individual level, meaning that this person doesn't like this color for this reason. And those are usually learned responses or associative responses. There are collective responses, which can be associative but are most often affective, and that would be inherited and climatological. Collective would be what is generally true about the population of human beings in the world. And so we can categorize color response via individual, collective, affective, which is again the action of the color on the biology or the psychology of the person, and what we associate color with. This is different from culture to culture, and so an individual response is associative, a collective response is affective. There's also light quality. You'll prefer certain colors under certain lighting conditions, and you will eschew certain colors under certain lighting conditions. Oftentimes when you go shopping, you go to the rack at Nordstrom and try on something in the dressing room. You take it home thinking it's going to look great, and you put it on under a different light source and it doesn't quite do the same thing that you thought it was doing in the dressing room at the department store. That's usually a lighting issue because certainly the garment hasn't changed. And then of course there's age. The same color can have both positive and negative responses, and even out of the same person. In other words, if you really like orange, you probably won't like it as well in the spring as you will in the fall, because it's not usually associated with spring. These are all things to think about, and as a designer, you need to think about your color choices as not just being a balanced, harmonious scheme, but you have to figure, okay, who's my audience? Is the AARP audience really going to respond to a bright violet and yellow-green color scheme that is overextended on the yellow-green and a very high energy design? Probably not. A lot of our color symbolism and response that is learned comes from historical references, and in Western culture, heraldry was one of those. Coats of arms and banners and colors had meaning. It was a way of communicating. We have red being courageous, blue being trustworthy and pious, sincere. Yellow was honor, which is kind of interesting because nowadays things like being yellow-bellied in Western culture or writing yellow journalism is not honorable. Green generally is associated with growth and hope, and white is faith, purity, innocence. Black in Western culture deals with grief and being burdened or weighted down. Orange is strength and endurance, and purple was royalty or rank. And very often we see these same associations still in effect in various parts of our culture, the retailing culture, the industrial design culture, graphic design, web design, things like that. Asian, Eastern culture generally, red deals with prosperity, yellow is blessing and protection against evil, blue is wealth, violet's also wealth. White deals with things that keep people stable in life. Black can be mourning, but black can also be celebratory, and white can be mourning in certain Eastern cultures. Judeo-Christian, which is the Western culture heritage, deals with the idea of red representing blood, life. Yellow is a sense of the presence of God's glory. Blue denotes water and also wealth. Same thing with violet, and that's based on the fact that blue and violet dyes were very hard to come by, very expensive to extract from the plants, and therefore very expensive. So they were not worn by anybody but the most high-end status-oriented people. White was purity, cleanness. Gold was strength and wealth. Gray in Judeo-Christian culture is honorable, it's age and maturity, can also be sorrow. And black, evil, disease, and judgment. The idea of darkness or absence of light in Judeo-Christian culture is not a happy place to be. In Islam, green is kind of the flagship color and deals with life and happiness and strength. Blue is mystical, red deals with the life force, also deals with passion. White is beauty, femininity, idea of paradise, and black is sorrowful and bad fortune. So in Western culture, we carry these things over, and I'm going to go through the three primary hues. There's a supplement PDF that lists associative and affective responses for all the hues and gives some variation within the hue families. So you want to take a look at that and give it some study because it will be pertaining to and useful for the next two projects. So red, the affective, which is the inherited, not learned, but this is true for all people everywhere at all times. The affective responses are that red acts on the pituitary to increase your metabolism. So your blood pressure goes up, your appetite is stimulated, other things such as passion are stimulated. It does affect your sense of smell. It is a highly dynamic, advancing color spatially. It's the first color we see. It is the longest wavelength. It encourages healing and encourages synaptic growth. Synapses are the junctions between nerves, and especially in the brain. So if you give an infant a red field or a red color, it will stimulate and encourage brain synapses to form. The associative aspects of red include passion, both sexual and anger, energy. We associate it with danger. We use it a lot as a warning, like stop signs. It is a power color. It's the ultimate power color for women. It's the color of courage and also associated with blood. Yellow irritates, agitates. Although it's a cheerful color, it is not really a good color in an environment because it will actually stimulate people to get upset more easily. It is a dynamic, advancing color, and as already discussed in terms of force when we dealt with extension contrast, it is the most complex color in terms of trying to process it visually. Associative responses include speed, affordability, and yellow with red are coupled to make a category brand color for fast food. Yellow is associated with sunshine, so it's a warm color. It's considered cheerful. It is a color of warning or caution. It is associated with cowardice and honor, and with wealth, with gold. Blue has just the opposite effect of red and yellow. The pituitary secretes chemicals which cause a calming effect. It will decrease your blood pressure, decrease your appetite. It retards growth. It retards healing. In other words, it'll slow down your healing process. It's a physiologically cooling color. You will feel cooler in a blue room than you will in a red or yellow or even white room. Blue is usually associated with masculinity, with being intellectual. It's associated with introverts. Loyalty and trust, the navy blue power suit that has carried over from the 80s into our day, something that attorneys and politicians wear when they're debating. It is considered a stable color. It's associated with fresh water, sky, and sadness.